So please join me in welcoming. I'm so excited to have this group of panelists coming here together for this conversation of John, Ken, Pam, Annie, and Laura. So thank you so much, and please join me in welcoming them to the DC Startup Week stage.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm just going to start by sharing a screen here. There we go. Get all the lovely participants up in my window view. Great. So thanks so much for joining us. We're here today as Distributed Success, and already had a little bit of an introduction. I'll let each of our panelists introduce themselves in a bit more detail when we get there, but it is Dr. Laura Hambley, Ken Cameron, me, John White, Andy MacLeod, and Pam Louie. And we're here to talk to you today about how to build successful processes and people in remote workplaces, which is a very hot topic these days and very useful for any startup or business alike. We do have a couple of host rules. We were going to ask to please mute your mics before we started, but you're all muted already. So we've taken that liberty for you just so there's no additional noise and we can focus on our talk. Please use the Zoom chat though to have any discussion and to ask us questions for the Q&A. If you do decide to have a little bit of discussion along with adding a couple of questions, maybe just trigger questions that you have specifically for us, put in all caps question before you ask so that we just don't miss it. We'll be keeping a running track of those questions and we'll answer them on the last part of our talk, which is a bit of a Q&A session. And of course, we want to have a little bit of fun while we're here. So let's have a good time, keep the chats free flowing, and we're really looking forward to this. We do want you to learn. We've decided to put forth a few learning objectives for you. Number one is that we'd like to share with you our Am I muted? I am. Wow. Was I muted that whole time?
No, John, you were just muted for the last 10 seconds.
Okay, well, that's an odd one. So just the learning objectives, what we'd like to get handled with you here today is to show you our 4-part model, which will guide your organization to remote work success, and then understand the importance of leadership, team effectiveness, and culture at your organization. And so when we get things rolling, we wanted to give you a little bit of a background for our group, which is Distributed Success. So we offer consultation and support for organizations who want to conduct some or all of their business remotely. We also work with leaders and organizations in all different types of industries as they adopt or adapt to a remote workplace. And while there are many tools and technologies that are out there to help support remote workplaces, we try to focus on building a foundation within the organization, focusing on people and processes. That's what we do. That's how we thrive in the world. And so in order to get that kicked off, we do have our 4-part model here, which begins with enabling a high-performance culture. The second step we get to is adapting to a continuous improvement approach, continuous process improvement. The third is to have some enterprise alignment. And the fourth is to go out there and get results, really focusing on your customers and what they want at the end of the day. And so we'll walk through each of these phases step by step, and each of our experts on this panel will give you their guidance and advice, and hopefully that'll drive some good knowledge and information sharing. So to get things kicked off, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Laura Hambley, who can take us through the first element, which is enabling a high-performance culture, and specifically around leadership.
Sure, that would be excellent. And I'd like to start with a polling question just to understand a little more about who's in the audience. So if we could launch that first polling question, that would be great.
I think we've not had the ability to poll, Laura, but we can certainly ask people to throw a comment in the comment box.
Okay, so my question is, I was kind of ready for that polling question. We can skip that unless someone else has it handy. It was the one about leadership. It's okay, no worries about it. So it's really nice to be here. It's really nice to be here today. It was a little last minute us getting on, obviously, so we're don't have all the ducks in a row here set up, but really pleased to be here. I'm an organizational psychologist, and I've specialized for the last well, 17 years on remote leadership and team effectiveness. And with the COVID pandemic, this is now a global topic. So I'm really happy to share with you some of the key elements to consider when you're working on building a thriving remote workplace culture. So what we really look at when we're talking about developing effective cultures is the leadership. If you don't have effective leadership, whether you're a small startup organization, whether you're a fast-growing one, you definitely will have one or more people leading the charge and leading other people. And it's these capabilities that are so key to doing so well. So all of our research over the years has pointed to the fact that when you're leading remotely, you need to be really good at relationships. You need to be flexible, you need to drive high productivity, and you need to be aware of the cultural diversity and how to communicate with different cultures. So we look at all of these factors and we really try to identify gaps and where to build leadership capability. And so we'll move on to the next slide here. So we assess leaders and we try to understand where their strengths are and their gaps are and how to help them. For example, learn to promote healthier work-life balance in their teams. Stress and burnout are at really high levels and we need to stay on top of, as a leader of remote teams, how you can be aware of that, how you can demonstrate that in yourself, having a healthy work-life balance and how to promote that in others, and being a versatile communicator is another area that we identify, and we assess leaders on how well they are at adjusting their communication style to the different needs of the people on their team. And in your own team, really thinking about not everyone wants and needs the same types and frequencies of communication. So it's up to us to find out the nuances in our team and to communicate in ways that people want to be communicated with. So we'll move to the next slide. So when we look beyond leaders, we look at the teams. So if you think about your own startup organization and you think about how your team is functioning, and a team really is people who are interdependent and relying on one another. And when you're communicating remotely, it really does require some extra work to make sure that your communications are clear and smooth, that you're coordinated, and that you're collaborating. We have all kinds of softwares and tools for collaboration these days, but are we using them effectively? And then we look at climate to say, you know, each team contributes towards your culture, and is the team's climate itself a healthy one? And one of those elements that's really important is trust. How much are people trusting one another? Because trust is harder to build and easier to damage when you're working at a distance. So on to the next slide here, what we do is we will put teams through these assessments to understand where they are at when it comes to team effectiveness. How trusting is the team? How committed are they, etc. And each team member is able to contribute towards a snapshot of the team's health. And then you have something to build on and improve. Because a lot of times if you let a team fester, things can get really out of hand. You can lose good people and stress levels can be unnecessarily high. So on the next slide here, so what we do at EvOHlution is really understand the people, the leaders, the teams, and the individual contributors, and how well they're functioning, working remotely, and then helping to make them better. And I think it's never too early as a startup to start thinking about how our people can best thrive when they're working remotely, so that as you grow, you have the elements in place to have a really effective culture. So the next slide here, out of all of our assessments, we have the distributed work profiler, which is all about a person's fit, their personality fit for working remotely. We're giving 3 of these away if anyone is interested in this tool for your organization. It really helps people determine how they can be a better remote worker given how they're wired. So contact me today, and happy to give the first 3 of you that tool, and really excited to pass on the mic to Ken Cameron, who will talk about culture at a broader level.
Better unmute
Oh, I
there.
forgot to unmute my microphone. Thanks, John, for the reminder.
problem.
And all I really said was thanking Laura for her points and saying that Laura had drawn the connection between the importance of individual leaders and working remotely and working with different ways in which their team work remotely. And I just want to draw the connection between that and the overall culture around working remotely. My first career, and perhaps I'm best known for my work as a playwright and theater director. I spent the first 25 years of my career working in the theater world. And one of the interesting things about working as an artist in theater is that you have to bring teams of disparate subcontractors together, and they have to work together on a project in an aligned fashion towards a particular goal with a very specific deadline. And often these subcontractors either haven't worked together before or haven't worked together in a number of different years. And one of the issues is that your deadline is fixed in stone because you printed it on the poster. So I learned very quickly how to bring teams together and how to build the high functioning teams. And then I learned also how to bring that into the corporate boardroom. And one of the things I learned when I moved into the corporate boardroom is that we're not very intentional about it because it's hard for us to see what our organizational culture is. And it's a lot like the cartoon that's on the screen here, that we tend to look around our workplace like fish in a goldfish bowl. We can't see the water. We can't see the culture that surrounds us because it surrounds us every day. So we need to find some tools to help us break down the culture that surrounds us every day. And it's particularly important when we're moving from the office into the remote world, because we take elements of that culture with us. But the problem is that we don't take all of that culture with us. And if you don't know what the constituent elements of a workplace culture are, then you can't identify what you've left behind in the office when you're beginning to work remotely. So we have a little diagram here, this kind of triangle. And when you think about the results that you're trying to achieve in an organization, the results that you're trying to achieve strategically are often fueled or determined by the actions and behaviors that your people are enacting on a daily basis. And the actions and behaviors they take are often fueled and informed by their beliefs and values that they hold. And these can either be positive beliefs or negative beliefs, or positive values or negative values. And all of those values are in terms what creates your culture. So if you want to create different results, if you want to improve people's results, or if you want to maintain results as you move from in-office to working remotely, then you need to have a different set of actions and behaviors if you expect to get a different set of results. And then you also need to have a different set of beliefs and values. So you need to be looking at how you can reset your culture. And so we have a set of tools that we use to allow people to foreground these kinds of conversations. And it's a card deck. So there's a picture of the card deck, and I've got some hard copy of it right here in front of me. You can see kind of how thick it is. There's 81 of these different cards, and each of these cards represents a different organizational value that individuals in the or that the organization as a whole might have. And you can see that there's a whole wide variety of them here. There's being results oriented, there's innovations, there's these values that drive individuals, or there's integrity, and there's a whole bunch of these different things. But the advantage of these cards is that on the reverse side, there's a bunch of text, and that allows each of you to make sure that you're talking about the same thing. So when you're talking about innovation, we all know what we mean about innovation. When we're talking about integrity or customer service or being results oriented, or you know what any of these individual things mean, because there can be slight nuances from one individual to another. So it's important that we're all on the same page. And we've also gone further, and we've broken down these 81 values into 9 different categories. So on this card here, you'll see the second arrow is pointing towards a list of all the other cards that might be within that category, in this case, the category of innovation. But the thing that we found most useful about these cards is that if you were to turn it upside down, you would see that there's something that we call the flip side. And this is what happens if you've got either too much or not enough of that value. Either you've got an absence of that value or a surfeit, too much of that value at work in an organization. And so, for instance, with the innovation card, and it's a little hard to see on your screen, so I've got the card right here in front of me. And the flip side of it says that no organization can neglect its core business in favor of innovation. because then if you innovate too much, you either end up leaving too many people behind because they don't have time to consolidate those gains, or you start to neglect the core business and you start to reduce your revenues. And this is a typical problem that can often confront startups. So once you've identified or had a conversation around what those different values are, we often ask individuals, we often key them with a couple of, a key question. It can be any one of these 8 that you see on the screen here, depending on what the organization or what the purpose of that workshop is. You could be focusing on personal values or the organization's values, or what values you want everyone in the organization to share. And the first picture that you see on the screen here is individuals sharing a story or sharing their experience of those values in their workplace in one of our in-person workshops. But of course, like everyone else, when we were struck with the COVID-19 epidemic, we had to move a lot of our work online. So the second photograph you see is a screenshot of one of our online workshops. And you'll see that it's kind of shaped like a poker table. There's room for 12 participants to sit around the table, and they've each got their own little name, and they've each got their own little workspace, and all of the cards are digitally laid out on the table in front of you. And John's zooming in to show you what that looks like. It's a little blurry the more he scrolls in, but each of those cards, you can see the front face of it, and you can also see the back face, and you can zoom right in to get in on the text. And you can have entirely the same kind of conversation virtually that you would have in person. And what we often do after people have shared either their personal values or the values that the organization should be sharing as a whole, we'll get them to go through a dot voting exercise. And on the screen now, you'll see the results from one of our clients. And you'll see that there's a couple of different values on the side of the screen. And then you can see the number of different dots that different workshop groups itemized as to which would be most important for them. And you can see obviously that it stands out to you right away that everyone in the organization agrees that these 4 values are the ones that everyone should be moving forward. So what we did then was we were able to turn that into a model for the organization. You'll see that this particular organization chose 5. They chose being collaborative, accountable, respectful, and entrepreneurial. But what we found was that trust kept coming up over and over again in all of the workshops. So we put that at the center of their model. And you might also see that the little icons that are in that model also relate to the icons that are on the card. They're actually transposed directly from the cards, as is some of the text in the document that accompanies the model. And this serves to remind all of the employees that their input has been heard and integrated into the values of the organization. So it's less of a top-down approach and more of a grassroots approach. And one of the reasons we find that so important is because it empowers everyone to take ownership of the culture. If we go back to our original analogy of thinking of the goldfish who can't see the water around them, once you start to think about the water around you, then you start to think about the rules that you need to maintain in your shared pool, like no running on the deck, like no pushing each other in the pool, no bullying. And the employees, when they have shaped their own organizational culture and shaped their own values, we find that they also take ownership of their culture, and they start to, try to encourage one another to not pee in the pool. And they start to really police their own culture and even call their own leadership to account. And so we found this to be a really useful tool once they have something to talk about their organizational culture. And with that, I want to pass the conversation back over to another member of our team. I believe it goes to you, Jonathan.
It does indeed. Thank you very much, Ken, for walking us through that. So we'll shift now to the second part of our 4-step model, which is adopting continuous process improvement. So just by way of introduction, my name is John White. I've been a management consultant for 20 years, and with about 10 of those working remotely with distributed teams. And I specialize in operational excellence and organizational improvement, continuous improvement using Lean Six Sigma methods, basically methodologies to run your businesses more efficiently. So the first thing I wanted to say was, as your startups start to grow from the seed stage to the growth stage and beyond, things are going to start to happen really quickly. And one of the most challenging elements of your business is going to be the sudden complexity that you're going to run into as the company grows. Some grow in a controlled manner. They're ones that we plan for controlled growth, and others are unintentional consequences of that growth. We need to start growing or maturing in other areas of our business, and things just start to gravitate towards complexity. It's like the human condition. So regardless of if you go with a flat or a hierarchical organizational structure, or if you hire full-time staff or more prefer to go outsourcing, your your organization's still going to get more complex than you have ever imagined. So you imagine the founder or founders take a step back from the frontline tasks. They start guiding the people around them and supporting them. New employees get hired, teams or departments are formed. People start to lose line of sight to what other areas of the business are doing. And when that starts to happen, things can go awful wonky if you don't start to take control. And by adopting a continuous improvement approach, you can start to get some of those things within your control. And so one of the first things you should realize is that all organizations are basically big systems, even startups, comprised of typically 6 core elements that I have up on the screen. And those are typically from the purpose of what we're trying to do, what matters to our customers, how we're able to respond to demand levels, how efficiently or effectively we produce our products and services, the conditions of our organization, what its makeup is, and then we have our top-down management style or model of thinking. And so once we start to think about organizations like this, we can start to consider, if we're running into issues in our business, where those issues are kind of rooted from going from this model. Is it something we're not meeting a customer requirement, or are we not very efficient and effective in our processes, or we have a lot of rework that we're doing? And this has served me really well in the past, this line of thinking, because of all the clients that I have worked with, big companies usually only have a handful of people that care about or do something about issues when they find them. And this is kind of a big issue. We want more of our people to be looking for solutions, to be looking for issues and solutions for them. And so this is a foundational piece of a business that you're all, with startups, really ahead of the curve here to impart this wisdom on your people, to start looking for these issues and make sure that this culture of continuous improvement is embedded in your organization in early days. And so if we think back to where lean, the approach that I use for continuous improvement, all started back with Toyota. They're a great example of making this work because they had a automated loom organization, and then the founder, Kiichiro Toyota, wanted to start making cars. And so he traveled to America, toured around for 6 months, came back to Japan and had no idea how to make cars, how to make any of the parts. There was limited access to engineers because most of them are going to work with Nissan, but they had the drive, and they put themselves in a position to just want to make a car, a good car that their customers would buy. And Toyota himself put himself in a position to say, my job is the same as yours, to learn as fast as we can and to make things better as we go. And now Toyota has the largest market share in the car industry. And that's something to really be impressed with, I think. And they have developed this lean approach along the way. And so when we say the term continuous improvement, that means we're improving something that already exists, and we can't improve things if we don't change them. And so Einstein's great quote on insanity, that insanity, the definition, is doing things over and over and then expecting a different result. Well, that's not what we want to do. We want to, in fact, do the exact opposite. And so it shouldn't surprise you that the foundations of continuous improvement can be found way back when from scientific thinking, the scientific method, where we have a problem, we form a hypothesis, we do some testing, we analyze the results, and then we go back and we either make some judgments based on that our experiment went well, or we throw it out and come up with another hypothesis if it didn't. And it's very much the same coming from Deming's PDCA cycle, the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. And in more modern days, we're using the DMAIC cycle, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And we're not going to get too much into this. It's just to let you know that this is founded in some good background science. The principles of lean include defining value from the customer's perspective, understanding how value flows throughout your organization. You want to promote flow, which is having things go through without bottlenecking and having to stop at various stations. We want it to flow through our processes. We want to promote pull, where we're only asking for things to be delivered when they're requested, not forming big centers of inventory, and striving for perfection, which is a lofty goal, but we always want to be moving towards it, always trying to get better until the law of diminishing returns kind of hits us in the face and says it won't get us big enough gains to keep focusing improvements on this area. So the big thing we want to do, though, is attack complexity and remove waste from our systems. And here are some forms of waste. On the left are some forms of waste we've known about for over 70 years. And on the right are new forms of waste that we're still discovering as everything is changing in our world. And I'm sure we're going to have new forms of waste as we kind of move to more remote work in the post-pandemic world. But one of the principles to remember is that lean improves your process flow. The processes are the things that we do repetitively every day to produce our products and services. And typically you'll see things like on the left here, it's what you think your process is with maybe very little loops coming back. What it probably currently is this much more complex system where we have lots of redundancy and lots of areas to throw things out and go back and start over again. And what we want is this nice, smooth process flow on the right. And so if we can get our processes drawn and have everybody on the same page for what we're talking about, we can start to remove the waste from our systems and reduce the amount of complexity that we're saying. And another thing we need to do, we can't improve things if we don't have any idea of how they're working today. And so we want to focus on leading and lagging indicators, understanding that. Lagging indicators, we can't do anything about them once we've seen them. So financial reports are a good example here, but we can try and establish leading indicators so that we get an idea ahead of time if something is going to be going wrong that will affect our bottom line. And for all of the processes that we have in our organization, I would draw your attention to the process performance triangle we have here, where you can actually physically measure your processes on their adaptability, how robust, resilient, and responsive they are to changing in environments or the economy or customer base. You want them to be efficient so that you're streamlining and simplifying things, and you want them to be effective so you're reducing costs and meeting your customer expectations. So there are all kinds of metrics that we can come up with to measure our various processes and understand how well they're performing. And of course, visualizing data, like in the top right graphic, is very important. If I told you that my company made 20 widgets a day, well, how would you know if that's good or bad? But if I showed you a chart that showed my widget production over the course of a year every day, I don't think you'd even need to know anything about what I'm doing to realize that there are trends or patterns that exist. And you'll get definitely an idea of how well those processes are performing. And so I believe that people in an organization are so important, especially in the startup phase before a lot of the structure that's just and complexity that's thrust on you as you grow. People are going to be one of the most important parts of your business. And as Laura and Ken attested to, you need to work hard to make sure you're setting up the right environment to support your leaders, to support your people, to understand your culture. But as you do grow, the people will start, you'll see, to come and go. And it's the systems and our structure of the business that will remain. And so the lean and continuous improvement approach tells us that if we set everything up in the right way, we can have most anybody come in to work within these processes, and there'll be so much great information and knowledge that will be setting them up for success. So set your systems up right, and then add the right people afterward is something that can work really well in the future. And so I'll wind it down for today, but up on the screen right now are some tips on where you can get things started. And so from the top of the organization down has to be a continuous improvement approach. It can't just be in one area, because you'll always end up butting heads against other areas of the organization. And so remember, this is about experimenting and trying things and being pleased when you failed at times, because you will learn from it. Just don't keep repeating the failures, because then we're going to have to pull up that picture of Einstein again. Teach all your people about the basics of lean. They don't need to get certified. There's a lot of certification you can get, but you don't need to go down that road right away. You'll only maybe need some external help or 1 or 2 people inside that's certified in lean. The rest, you can just give them the basic rundown and give them some tools and tips on how to do things better. And then if you can measure it, you can manage it. So get away from the single number statistics and start getting into lots of data that supports how well your processes are performing, and focus on leading over lagging indicators. So that's my little bit. And now I'm going to turn it over to Pam Louie for our next segment.
Thanks, John. So the section I'm going to be covering is referring to aligning the enterprise. So if we could actually move on to the next slide, we'll get going. My perspective on all of these things that are happening are multifold. I've worked in consulting and in business for over 20 years, and being a chameleon, I thrive on learning all about different types of organizations and industries. So I've worked from local startups up to global enterprises that anyone who does a startup aspires to be that global giant. When we look at startups in themselves, they have a lot of priorities. And having been employee number 1 myself for a startup, there's all these great tools that we're recommending. We're talking about doing assessments and understanding your values and doing a process map and understanding what your process is. But this moment right now that you're taking out to educate yourself and understand about how to make your business better is great for these few days, but it does come back to you're looking at getting your funding, growing your business, and getting great people to work for you, finding those customers and getting that product out the door. So I'm going to keep this next piece very simple. It's going to come down to things that you choose that are the most important for you at this point in time. You won't be able to boil the ocean. It is about picking and choosing and thinking about what's fit for purpose for you and evolving as you start to scale. So let's move on to the next slide. So keeping this in terms of basics, if you're looking to align the elements within any business, your elements are going to be your strategy, your systems, and your processes. And it could be very mature, or it could be in its fledgling stages where you're just starting out. So if you think about this, when you're moving to a remote or hybrid organization, or you're starting from the very beginning, you do need to take a look, does your strategy align to a remote or hybrid environment? Do the existing systems, whether we're talking technology or just the way things work in the handoffs between engineering and your QA department or what have you, do those line up? And then your process, what is that? Is it consistent? If you were to onboard 5 people tomorrow, would you be able to get them all through and have that same experience for each of them and have that show up in how you work with your customers? The next thing that I would recommend, and this is a change management aspect, is creating that readiness list. So if you're working with your organization, and can we just flip back a slide? Thank you. That when you're working with your different leaders, there are a number of things that you need to do to get ready to run remote. And you want to make sure that you've got all those speed bumps or hurdles that'll get you in the way. So do you need to let your clients know? Do you need to let your suppliers know? Do you need to think about how you recruit your staff, which a lot of organizations have had to shift to by offering remote only positions. So those are some of the things that you need to do and measure against it and check and see how you're doing as you're moving through the process and if you need to check and adjust. And then on the people side, have the open conversations with your leaders. Don't make the assumption that everyone is completely comfortable with working with remote or hybrid teams. Getting your leaders comfortable and being open to talking about where they don't have a level of comfort, whether it's with the technology or whether it's having the conversations or not being someone who micromanages or hovers. That's very difficult for some people. And if they like to have a strong sense of control, you need to get that to them in a different way. But first of all, you actually have to identify that these are some of the challenges when you're working in this new environment. So once you've got the basics nailed down, then you're looking at creating momentum, and collaboration and engagement are key factors in change management, which is an area where I spend a lot of my time advising clients on. So one of the things you want to be able to do is give everyone the tools they need to be successful, whatever that is. So if we're hearing about work from home, it's very much, do you have the technology? Is it Slack? Is it Teams? Is it Miro? What are you doing to be able to enable people to connect, whether some of them are in an office location, a coffee shop, or at home? How are you keeping everyone together? And then thinking about the work styles, which you would learn from something like the assessment that Laura was discussing. The one that she does is very good. I've gone through it myself, and it gives you an indication on how many times you actually need face-to-face contact with someone else. How often can you work at home based on your experience and preferences, as well as communication preferences. Is it one-on-one? Is it a call? Is it a video chat? Is it going for a walk? What is this thing that gets the most energy out of those individuals? And then in terms of your communication, drive more of your communications online into communication channels, because that's going to create that transparency. When you're not together, there is a fear that people are missing out in conversations that are happening on the side. So the more that you can actually have them present in a location, whether it's a wiki or a SharePoint or Slack or some other channel, to be able to get the big moments there where people who couldn't make it or weren't invited could go through and you start to equalize on that trust level. And then the other option is to find creative ways for everyone to recognize and encourage the new behaviors, referring back to Ken's conversation about the kids in the pool, that you want everyone else to be a part of creating this new workplace that you have in mind, and being able to pat each other on the back or call each other out for things that they do well. And if you have that type of environment for being honest and upfront, being able to coach people when they're doing things that don't quite fall in line. And then the last few points that I want to hit on are showing them how it's done. So you've probably heard about leading by example. And what does that mean? So a lot of leaders, when they're trying something new, are not comfortable with it. They want to bring in a consultant to say, hey, so we're going to make this happen, right? And send out a few communications, talk to a few people, give them some training, and then we're good. And then you kind of dust it off. That is very much the opposite of what I'm referring to by leading by example. Everyone is uncomfortable with change, unless they're the ones that are actually putting it out there. If you find small ways, and it doesn't have to be everything, it's one thing that represents your true self and create a moment that others remember, then they will know that you're serious about it. So if you look at allies right now with a lot of things that are happening in the world, without getting too political, that you might be uncomfortable with it, but you're putting yourself out there and you're saying that this is important enough that I will put myself in this position. And if I can feel uncomfortable doing this, then I understand where you're coming from, and let's all do this together. So that is very much the secret to success if you're looking for any sort of major transformation. So that is pretty much my 3 points, that are focus areas that I want everyone to think about. And with that, I will turn it over to Annie MacLeod, and she can talk to you about getting results.
Thanks, Pam. And last on our model, we have the getting results piece. So as Laura and Ken and John and Pam talked about, we've got a lot of foundational pieces. And so where I come in from the team is as a project management coach and mentor. So I've been a project manager for over 35 years and had the opportunity to develop the project management game board, which is a sum of all of those years of practice and trying to figure out why do projects keep failing. So we've got a couple of tips in terms of processes and projects. Some of this may sound really bureaucratic, especially in a startup type of environment. But again, what we're really presenting is about how to set up some of those foundational pieces in your organization. They're going to take you from your startup and really be able to scale the way Pam had talked about it. So really there's 2 pieces to process versus project. Because as John had talked about, we really want to encourage you understanding your processes and customers and what those customer expectations are, and even how you measure whether you're effective, efficient, and adaptable. So that's always going to be the foundation of your business. But when it comes to projects, we measure projects very differently. They're successful typically by time, scope, and cost. That's how we measure it. So they do have very different measures of success. And one of the things that we encourage all of our folks to do is apply by the 80-20 rule. Realize that you will never have the capacity to do every project that you want to do. One of the things you want to be able to resource is kind of that 80-20. So you want to spend the bulk of your resources on process and servicing customers, and then that 20% for projects, you want to make sure that those projects are really well understood and have got the best chance of success. So why is this important? There's kind of 2 key aspects to it. We talked about briefly about that maximizing resources. So that's on both sides. So you want to maximize the resources, adding value to customers. And from a project perspective, you want to make sure that you're getting projects that are going to deliver those key strategic results and things that you're trying to do to grow your business. you always want to think about really projects. The only reason you have a project is to improve a process. At the end of the day, you always have to have that foundational piece of a process. I mean, even if it comes to building roads, we know that what we're really trying to do by building bridges and roads is improve traffic. John talked about earlier about measuring your processes. So if you've got some good basic metrics in terms of cycle time, quality, cost, your adaptability and stuff, and understand what your customer's expectations are, that's going to make your customer or your projects a lot more successful by being able to quantify what you expect to achieve in that project. The other piece too is you want to increase accountability and decision making. And what I found with a lot of clients, especially as they grow, is that things can get bottled up in all that bureaucracy and hierarchical positions and everything like that. But if you've got a good handle on your basic processes and key customer milestones, you know exactly you know, who's responsible for which parts of all those customer transactions. The other key part of projects is you have to remember, there's the old saying that the operation was successful, but the patient died. So technically, we may have measurements in place that, yes, we met our budget, yes, we met our timeline. But if you did the wrong project in the first place, that if you didn't select the appropriate project or set it up for success individually, it doesn't matter what the time, cost, and scope of it was. The other key thing I see for a lot of organizations, and especially growing organizations, is corporate projects versus the projects of your customer. So there's a lot of organizations out there that may be, say, building software for different companies. That's a project to their customer, but it can't be a project to your organization. You need to be able to understand the difference between your projects and the projects of your customers themselves. And a lot of things can get pretty gnarled up in there. So the last thing you do is as I mentioned with the project management game board, the first place that we start is, does this qualify for a project? Which is, from a game perspective, is, you know, you got to roll a 6 to get on the board. So what we've developed is we've got a short checklist here that you could fill out to use this as a tool to help you define projects in your organization. So if you would like a electronic copy of this particular slide, then feel free to email me at annfmacleod@gmail.com. And then back to you, John.
Perfect. Thank you, Annie. Yeah, that distinction between client, customer projects and projects within your own organization blows my mind often, how easy it is to get that confused. So one other little tidbit just before we open it up for questions and answers, and it falls within the Get Results area, is we've talked a little bit about customers, but we just wanted to reinforce and really stress that without customers, our businesses don't exist. So we really need to make sure that we're meeting our customer requirements. And so in the top left image that we have on the screen, I always tell my customers that their clients are going to want things, they want it all, they want it now, they want it for free. And so if we try and understand what that means from a customer requirements perspective, it really relates to wanting it all as a quality, is around quality, wanting it now is around you being able to deliver it, and they want it for free is really you finding that right price point where they'd be willing to pay. And so how that relates to your organization will be around your operating effectiveness, your cycle time, and your operating efficiency. And another area, we talked about measures and metrics before, it can sometimes be very hard to define how to measure how well your processes are performing. And so really when you think of it, you can use a tool like critical to quality trees, where you start with a basic need, and these are typically very general and hard to measure. So in this example, good room service. Well, what does that really mean? How do you measure good room service? If you start to think about it, you can break it down to your key drivers, which are good delivery, delivering hot and fresh, and having a good selection, and then go to the next level of specificity, which is, you know, you can even have multiple levels, but at the end of the day, we're getting it there. We have to have it in 30 minutes max. There has to be a smile and a greeting. We have to have temperature minimums. These are all things we can measure. They're very specific. So that's how you can bring things from really hard to measure in general, all the way up to specific and easy to measure for the metrics that will support your process performance. And then finally, the last one is a model I use called the Kano model, which simply shows how well your organization is performing. On the x-axis and on the y-axis is the level of value or satisfaction that your clients or your customers will have. And it starts with fundamental characteristics or very basic ones. These are the ones that you only notice when they're not there. And so I always use airline examples for this, where a fundamental characteristic is don't crash the plane. Please don't crash the plane. If you do, well, maybe not me anymore, but my family will be pretty upset about that. So you have to provide those, otherwise you're going to slip. The next is more is better. And so the more of it you provide, the happier people are going to be. So arrive on time, don't lose my luggage. Maybe a nice drink cart with some free pop is about all we get on flights these days. So the more of those, the better. And then finally, we have delighters. And these are the ones that nobody asked for, but when you deliver them, it kicks their satisfaction up several levels. So this would be getting a bump to first class. And the only thing to consider around delighters is if you offer them too much, then they'll start to slip down in these other categories, and they'll put your organization in a really tough position of needing now to provide them in order to get that satisfaction level, especially if it slips all the way down to a fundamental where they're expecting it and will notice when it's absent. So imagine if you were bumped to first class 9 flights in a row, and then you go for that 10th flight and they're like, get back there and coach. You'd be a little bit upset about that, wouldn't you? So it's just ways of thinking about how to measure the customer experience. And there's one other element around customers that Annie will take us through around internal and external customers. Oh, better unmute, Annie.
One of the other key things that we've learned in developing the project management game board is identifying those key stakeholders. Again, very early on in your process. And it's really important to understand and not forget that you've got internal customers as well as external customers. So you've got the external folks that are paying the bills, but you've also got all those different internal parts of your organization that are also customers. So the payroll department, which is critical to the success of most organizations and keeping your employees, those kinds of things that you have to be aware of, those processes that support your organization and keep it going forward.
That's right. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our presentation. We'd like to turn it over for some questions to the crowd. I understand from that we might only be able to have time for 1 or 2 questions. And I think EvOHlution has one of them. I'm not sure if anyone got a chance to track. We do. Look at this. Fancy. So the question is, what do you do when you can't get your team to adopt new processes? Oh, very interesting. I think Pam and I maybe could have a bit of a field day with this one, because we're not telling them hard enough to. No, it's so one of the things that I try and practice when we're working on process improvement projects is we need to involve anyone who's going to be affected by the process change in the improvement element of the project. And this is not a matter of walking in and saying, I know the new best way to do it, I'm going to put it in place and that's what we're doing. You get a lot of resistance to that when you try and implement that process. Instead, if you take the collaborative track, you try and get your people on the team to come in and contribute to the process improvement initiative. They'll actually be the ones coming up with the process improvements, or at least they'll be aware that their ideas were heard and considered, and they'll know the reasoning. They'll understand why we decided to go a different way. So if that's the case, I think that would help some of the process change get handled a little bit better. And then Pam, do you have anything to add on that around the change management for helping them to get that stuck in their corporate DNA?
I do. So having people who don't want to adopt a new process is pretty much the norm. You will see that in any organization you go to. It really kind of comes down to how overtly are they resisting it. And resistance isn't a bad way to go. It really is their way of saying, hey, we haven't had enough conversation and you're not understanding me. And so at that point, it is very much having the conversation and sending in the leader or the sponsor or the person that actually wanted to have this process put in place, have a one-on-one with that individual is a very powerful thing to do, to really understand their perspective, because in many cases, the people designing the process could have missed a very critical point there could be another group doing the same thing, a shadow function. It could be they see it's very bad for a certain customer base, or there could be very valid reasons on why they're actually not adopting them. So I'd say it is getting to the bottom of why they're not adopting them, as opposed to thinking they're just not doing it because they're being stubborn.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, a culture of continuous improvement would certainly, over time, help to avert these kind of things from happening in the first place, which I think is what Pam was alluding to there. So that was a great question. Hopefully we've answered that accurately. And I don't know if there's any other questions from the group in the chat. I think we caught up to time, Corey.
I think we did. Nice job, guys. That was great.
If anyone wants to drop their contact details in the group chat, we do have some giveaways we would like to do. We have a Ken's card deck, a cultureSHIFT deck that we'd like to give away. And we would also like to offer 2 one-hour consults to anyone that would like to avail themselves of our team. So if you could put in, if you're interested in the group chat, put your name, your company name, and your contact details. We'll record it. We'll do a little bit of a random draw, and we'll pick some winners. And thanks to everybody so much for attending.
Amazing. Thank you. As you guys are putting your contact information in the chat, just wanted to say thank you again to John, Annie, Laura, Ken, and Pam for a fantastic discussion on how to build successful processes and people in remote workplaces. We really appreciate your time and support of the DC startup community. Up next, we have open mic failure stories. I think it just started. So if you guys would love to see you all over there on our next session. At times, you know, we can get caught up about startup success, landing the next big deal, or finding the right hire that we forget to speak about the ups and downs that we went through to get to that successful moment. So come ready to share your failure story so we can learn from each other and end the day with some good laughs. Again, thank you to this great panel, and see you all soon.